demonstrating productivity reduction and the pauses to work in construction planning, obviously prompted by the current emergency. My name is Richard Ormerod. I've got a background in the construction industry, worked for many years in the planning environment, and I've spoken to many planners about their issues. So I work for Elecosoft. We produced a Power Project piece of software that I'm going to be using to demonstrate this today. We've been in this marketplace for a long time, so we feel we've got a good handle on what we do. We're producing a product that is easier to use than Microsoft Project and at least as powerful as more expensive systems like Primavera. And some of the features you're going to see today, you definitely can't use in the sort of weaker systems like Microsoft Project or even P6. So we don't do this in isolation in the UK, we do this all over the world. And I am talking about a bit of software today, but as a company, we can offer advice. You can reach a well-staffed, knowledgeable help desk, speak to a human being very quickly. We offer training and consultancy. So as I say, I'm using Power Project, the most commonly used system in the construction industry in the UK and in many other parts of the world, hundreds of thousands of users worldwide. So, so that's what we've got to look forward to. I do want to just quickly poll you to answer some quick questions. So I'm going, just so everybody will understand the audience that we've got watching this today, I'm going to ask you to fill in the questions that you see on your screen. So I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 seconds and then I'm going to close the poll and I'll reveal the results to you. So another few seconds, everybody. Not everybody's done it, but I'm looking for a 75%. It's got to 80. Okay, we seem to be stuck there, so we'll close that and share the results on screen. So hopefully you can see that. So we've got the majority of project planners, a few project managers, and a few others. So hopefully, I'm just going to pause there. So people are telling me that you can't hear me very well. Is that true? I think the sound check is okay. Can somebody tell me if they can hear me okay? Okay, so, okay, lots of people say you can hear me. A couple of people can't, so it's got to be at your end. So I shall continue. So, so we're going to ask another poll here. So, so I wanted to know the impact of the current emergency on the work that you're currently engaged in. So, which I'll share with the audience when we've got to at least 75%. So everybody's been effective. It's about 50-50 work being stopped or work being interrupted. So there's a lucky small number who are working without interruption. So good on you. So finally, a last question about the severity of that interruption. So just give it a few more seconds. Okay, so I'll share that result with you on screen as well. So as you can see, the majority are severely interrupted, strong minority, minor interrupted, one or two lucky in people who are not being interrupted. So okay, so that was I think informative and useful for everybody. So I hope you appreciate that. So I thought it's worth saying just a very few general points before diving into the demonstration that I'm going to give you, showing you a few how to demonstrate impacts of stops, delays, and reductions in productivity. But you also, whatever you manage to demonstrate with the software tool, you still got to be able to substantiate that. and you've got to substantiate that. It's important to keep good records. You've got to have evidence, and it's also important, I would say, to keep communication going, both to the supply chain above you, below you, and to the client chain above you, a management chain. And presently, probably the full extent of the delay isn't fully known, but you will need to have this, supporting evidence and documentation. So good to get regular site diaries, increase the focus of that, get photos, obviously where possible, records of people, numbers on site. And I think the particular feedback I'm getting is that the procurement issues are going to be quite a big impact. So you've got to carefully monitor the supply chain of future materials and people that you plan to come into your site. It's worth checking the type of contract in case there are any time limitation requirements on when you can lodge a statement of impact, and also worth checking out to see if you've got any useful clauses in any building insurance policy you might have. So that's worthwhile to say that and bear that in mind. So I'm just going to be demonstrating how we can model and demonstrate these problems in our construction schedule. But I think the starting point must be, and I'm assuming as a starting point that you've all got this in place, but if you haven't, it's worth some time doing it before you start trying to model it, and that is to have a robust program. So you've got a fully linked schedule that's robust, and you can check this with the quality check feature in Power Project 15, which I'll show you very briefly. If you're going to rely on any resource or cost information, you need to make sure that's in your program before you baseline it, because you need to demonstrate what it was and now what it is. And of course, it should go without saying that you've created a baseline, a snapshot at a moment in time. You can have multiple baselines. You should have one at the beginning, one at the last significant agreed change, if there ever was one. And I would think also, I would say a most important thing, probably less carried out than having a baseline, but some people do not have an accurate as-built program up to the point that the event started. So I would stress that, and so do not start with a jagged project where you've got uncompleted tasks in the past, maybe completed ones in the future. So if we just take a very brief look at Power Project itself, so we've got this on screen. This project is a sample one that we install when you install the software, and so this is the one that I'll be using. I've progressed it for a little while, and I have also got a baseline. So everything that we see on screen has got a little yellow companion. That's the original situation, but I've straight line progressed this. I have progressed it, and this would be the best practice, using progress periods. So every month, we started off monthly because we were going slowly, then we've been doing it weekly. So every time we enter progress, we create a progress period, we give it a date, we give it a different color, and we say exactly what's been done. So we've got a difference between the duration of the original and what's currently happened, and we can see the percentages that we've got in every individual period, so we can know what's happened. Now, there's some people don't like that view, and you can take that progress information in every period and you can throw it onto the baseline, and that's what's called a jagged progress view. And so in Power Project, a view with that, you just click on this option to enable that, and then you've got this demonstration of what the progress would look like on the baseline itself, and I call that the contract manager's view, but it isn't useful really in projecting what must be done. So I would urge you to not do that. If you only have that, it's possible to download from our website a progress transfer macro that's got many subtle features to try and sort that out, but unless you've got progress periods, you're not going to have a lot of luck. So you've got to get to this point, I would suggest, where you've progressed it, and we can then move on to discuss the various techniques that we can employ. And so those techniques I'm going to talk about is highlighting periods in the project when things happened, and also at the end to show the different effects of different events that have happened to us. So I think calendars have got quite a role to play. I think there's a really subtle and powerful part of Power Project's calendars where you can show affected tasks and you can show the impact of a shorter working time. We're obviously going to talk about how we can model the impact of procurement delays. We're going to have events that cross the boundary between an affected period and a non-affected period, and we've got to just show you a technique to deal with that. Also, it's good if we can quantify the work and the work rates of events, and so we can demonstrate how they've changed rather than just changing the durations, but obviously we can do both. And we want to demonstrate, if we want to demonstrate, and I think it would be useful to show the resource impacts, particularly across these affected periods, both for individual tasks and the whole program itself. So I'm now going to spend the rest of the time presenting this. I might slightly run over, but as I say, so the first thing in my scenario is that we've progressed the work up to the 23rd of March when we were affected by the government's decision to introduce social distancing and safe working, and we paused the site for a couple of days whilst we planned and implemented what we were going to do to create that. So the best way to model that is I'm going to create a new progress period called shutdown, and I'm going to set a date that is going to be 2 days after that time. So it's going to be the either the beginning of this day or the end of the day before. And if I then make that the progress entry period, you see that we've got that jagged line, and I'm going to then reschedule that so we see the impact of that on the schedule. And I want to illustrate that gap and then also project that to the end. So the best way of doing that is to right mouse click on the body of the bar chart to choose the grids tab, menu option, and the shading option. So we're going to add a shading color. So I'm going to choose a color between 2 dates. This is going to start on the 23rd of March, which is when the close down started. It's going to go to the end of the 24th of March as well. So we can apply that to the screen. You can see that happen. We can also, and if we just turn the baseline on and go to the end, we can see we want to illustrate the impact that's had with the change of where we were originally going to finish and where we are now. So I'm going to add a further one that's going to start on the the original end date was the 7th of October, and it's now going to be the end of the 8th. So that's a 2-day impact. So I'm going to give it the same color as I gave it previously. So that's a nice illustration of that. I'm going to add a text annotation just so that we can say that that's going to be our bit of typo there. Shutdown delay. If only I could type. And I'm going to right mouse click on it and take its properties so that I can also change its color. So that's just useful as a sort of holding point, but also I want to go back to the starting position and I want to highlight the affected area. So from the 25th of the 3rd to the 26th of April, which is when we're hoping that the lockdown impact is going to end. I think that's a bit optimistic, but this is obviously a moving feast. So these highlighting of sections can be really useful to show the impact at different times. So that's the first topic that I wanted to just illustrate in case people weren't aware of that. Many of you probably are. But I've also wanted to highlight individual tasks and how they could be impacted. Maybe some are, maybe some aren't. And the best way of doing that is through calendars. So I've made a different calendar, and I'll show you the anatomy of this in a moment. If I drag that calendar onto an activity and let go, then we've got various options about what could happen at this point. I'm always going to keep the duration the same, but it's now going to have a different background. So I've made a pattern that will appear in the background, but only of those tasks and only for the period that I've selected. So as we move that into the future, then that pattern is only extended into that section. And the way that that has done in Power Project is we build the bottom layer of calendars. We make different exceptions, which are either working or non-working. So I've said that I want to demonstrate it as a working exception, and I've given it a different color and possibly pattern. And then I've taken a work pattern, which is what a standard week looks like, and I've then said, well, instead of my regular work pattern, which has got no coloring, I'm going to give it this particular one. So I've then built up a work pattern that contains that, and I go to my calendar section and I take an individual calendar, and under work patterns tab, I say, well, we've got the original pattern from the very beginning of the calendar to the start of the event, and then I've got this new pattern from the start of the event to the end of it, and then we return to the old pattern as well. So you could have multiple entries into here, and it's a really powerful sort of thing. And the other reason that I've done it is I've also introduced an exception, because part of our social distancing policy is we need to have a social distancing queuing system for entry and exit of the site. So I've made a non-working exception called slow ingress and egress, and I've also then adjusted a work pattern so that we're going to spend an hour, we're going to lose an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening of effective production time whilst this policy has an impact. And so I've also put that in a calendar. So that was a bit labored, but if I just showed you it happening, many of you would wonder why the hell that happens. So if I take a different calendar and apply it now, it's had the impact of losing 2 hours a day. And so that little sort of jagged comb effect is those hours at the beginning and the end of each day, and it's effectively made this activity longer because it's sticking out, and the more it sticks into the affected zone, the more it is extended by those extra hours. You are going to have odd hours kicking around using this technique. So I want to select the other affected activities. I can do that by clicking and control clicking, or I can use the sort of area select rubber boxing tool, and I can say, well, I just want to select all the things that this box touches, and all of the things it touches I can then multi-edit, and I can just drag and drop and assume on that. So all of those activities have then been affected, and then I need to reschedule, because of course now that's going to impact when certain portions of them are in that period or not, and that's going to be the impact of my slow ingress and egress aspect. So I'm going to go to the end of the diagram, and I'm going to, as you might have guessed, include another shading pattern. So we're going to introduce another one that's going to go from the end of the first one. So it's going to start on the 9th of October, and it's now going to extend until, I believe, the 15th of October. And we need to give it a different appearance color, just to make it stand out differently. Maybe not another green. So we can then copy this annotation by control dragging, right mouse click, change its color. There's no shortcut way of doing any of this. And this is going to be our egress delay. So that's one other impact that's happened to our schedule. And the other impacts that have happened, although it's probably worth saying that some people don't like that comb effect that you get on activities. And just to remind you where you can go to do that, if you right mouse click in the date zone and take the properties, you can change the folding calendar. So we can choose the one that's got this effect in it. And if we tick the non-working work pattern, then we can get rid of that comb effect. It just means that these weeks are actually slightly shorter than the weeks after it. So you can demonstrate the impact. I personally like to keep it on because I think it sort of underlines the fact that they're sort of serially impacted. Now they're impacted because it just takes longer to get in and out of the site, but there's also a reduction in productivity going on because we can't get as many people into the same site. We've got less people turning up for work, voting with their feet. So we can then start to model the impact of that change of productivity from resource restrictions. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. We can just change the durations that I'll turn to in a moment. But another way is that in Power Project, there is a task quantity setting, which is an attribute of an activity. And so an activity can have a quantity. There's a certain amount of work. It can have a different unit. You can make your own units. And so you can just record what it is. And that's useful for many people do that for all sorts of reasons. Progressing is a good one as well. But we plan to do this one at 25 cubic meters a day. And so in this case, we're going to say, well, we can only do it at 12.5. So it's a way of demonstrating what that would be. Now it's sticking out beyond the effective period, so that bit that sticks out won't be, and we'll turn to that issue in a moment. So that's one way of doing it. If we've got if we can quantify the amount of work, that's a better way of doing it, I would suspect. But the other way is to say that, well, if we take the other activities that are affected, we haven't got a quantity in there, but we can justify the fact that they've increased in their duration. So this is a good way of demonstrating the usefulness of the Object Edit toolbar to multi-edit. This central panel is about the duration. So with multiple items selected, I can say I want to increase all of their durations by adding 50% on. So they've got different durations. It's taken 50% of each one to do that. So we've got that current situation and can see what impact that has on the end date. So that's moved this item out completely, so it's no longer affected, but we've still got these two sticking out at the end. So we want to select both of those activities, right mouse click and split them at a certain date, the date being when the restrictions are lifted. And so that then essentially makes these two separate activities. It's got a different ID number. We could maybe give them a different description so they're not going to be confusing to other people later on. And the bit that's now in the unaffected zone, although we might have another zone that is increasing productivity but not return to the previous levels. But if we again say that we're going to take 50% off that bit, so we're back to what it would have been originally. So we can now reschedule that and see the knock-on impact of how that's going to flow into the end, and that's going to be the impact of our resource reduction. So again, we're going to go to the end. We're going to make a new shading period, which is going to be from the 16th to the 21st, I believe, and we'll leave it as yellow because that's always the default one. And then, of course, we're going to need to describe that. So we're just going to take a one we've done before, right mouse click, change its color. Gets a bit tedious, but it's got to be done. So that's our resource reduction, and we can demonstrate how that's come about and justify it. Whether we're going to be in line for any compensation is all part of the arrangement that you have on the particular project and your contract and your supply chains contract, but we're here about demonstrating impact. So I think the other thing to demonstrate impact of is the resource impact of any of these things. So on some or all of the activities, I've got resources assigned, and over the period that's affected. So the first graph here is the black lines are the original resource quantities expressed as cumulative man days every week. So it's a way of seeing what the total man days are across this section, which was 246 man days. The blue bit is the current projection and the history. So we still end up with 246 man days in total, but it's spread across the whole of the project. So you can demonstrate this sort of lack of resource over time and that it took longer than anticipated. So it's a good demonstration of that. And this second one is a head count. So at any one time, the black line was what we originally intended to do, and the green area is what we now intend to do. So all of that is useful, and it's anything that you've got displayed you can print out and send to any output device, any page size, any external file format that you can get a driver to support. So that's all useful information. But my project, and I would hope that many of your projects don't just have a structure to them. So I've got parents and children and grandparents and great grandparents, etc. And this is what's often called the work breakdown structure. So in my program, I've actually got a procurement section, a construction section, and a prelim section. So we've just been looking at construction so far, but I've also got another view created which has got a different table, and that's sort of often useful for the procurement. So those are people who don't use this sort of technique. I've got all my different packages of work, and I'm going to find a supplier to fulfill them. So I need to get the basic design information. So let's take suspended ceilings, basic design information from the design team, which is the milestone. So I will monitor that. And then I should also be monitoring the rest of it, which is we're going to take a certain amount of time to go out to supply chain and invite tenders. We're going to take another period of time to select which company is going to carry it out. They need some time to make working drawings, which they would have told us. The design team need to approve those or whatever comments they want to make on that without affecting their liability. Then materials need to be procured, possibly manufactured. They need to mobilize, get to site, and start to work. And you want all of that to happen in good order so it doesn't affect the timing of the construction work, and the construction work is driving when you need that. So all of those are good. What is really, really important, I think, is that you monitor the progress of this in exactly the same way that you would in Power Project. So we've got a problem with our roofing supplier. So we're coming up to award that contract, and we've told we're going to get the design information in time, but they're saying that they've got sort of distress signs about their capabilities in the future. all of them. So we want to model the impact of that. So I'm splitting the screens just so that you can understand this by seeing it all happen at the same time. So I've got a roofing activity and I've got a mobilization of the roofing thing. And if there's a logic link from that to the that activity on screen. So I can see that I've got a link to the roof finishes. And if I select the roof finishes, I've got a link to the procurement. So, and if they were on the same chart, you could see that link. So I just wanted to determine that was the case, but we've got this delay event that's going to happen. And so we want to link that into our current schedule. So after we've been through the selection process and awarded that contract, they're not going to be able to start work on their working drawings till they finish that work. And so that would be normally what you would do, but I would take an extra step of going behind that link and changing its link category. So you can create different link categories in the library of Power Project, and we can give it a different appearance. So that's one reason for doing it. And so then if I demonstrate that impact by rescheduling that's going to push out the roof finishes in the program, and of course it's going to push out the end date as well dramatically. And I think these are going to have a bigger impact on the program than other more real but more minor delays. So I just want to add in my final shading, which is going to be from the 22nd of the 10th to the end of, I think it might be the 19th. So probably not different enough to so it was the 19th, the end of the 19th. So we just got to finalize that by putting a bit of text in there. So if we copy that again, right mouse click, change the background. And we can move them around and everything. But the advantage of having a different link type also is that we can, in the reschedule options, if you wanted to say, well, I just want to take that change away, you don't have to delete anything. You just have to say, ignore this link category when you reschedule as though it wasn't there at all. And then you can go back to the position that you had before very easily. So that's a really good technique when you're introducing changes to the schedule. And it's always good to be able to undo a schedule, of course, fully if you need to. So that's really most of the techniques that I wanted to make. And I shall just got one thing to say, and then I'll end the recording and take any questions. So the other thing I want to say is I don't think QSs don't tend to trust planners and project managers with the cost. They love Excel too much. But one of the things that you can demonstrate is the impact on time-related cost. That is the prelim. So I've linked my activities in the program and collected them in hammocks in my prelims area, so it's which has got a time-related cost, a cost per week. So in my original plan, I've got the blue lines. So in the bottom graph, which is our cumulative expenditure, so we were going to finish spending earlier, of course, and the total was going to add up to just under 700,000. But what's happened is the red items, so no costs of resources or materials have gone up in the program itself. It's purely the impact of these delays on the additional overheads. And so our additional overheads have gone up to just over 725. So that's purely by an impact on the program itself. So that's worth knowing about, and probably less practiced than the other aspects that I've shown you so far, and I hope you've benefited from these techniques. If you can think of any others that I've missed out, I would be very happy to hear that. I'd be happy to engage in any individual discussions, but I would thank you for your time